Welcome to the week 14 video lecture. This week the topic is ethics and gender. And what I really want to spend this time doing is driving home the main point here, that ethics is a gendered kind of discussion. And what I mean by that when I say that something is gendered is I mean that there are differences in the way that people approach something that are relevant or based on their gender. So when we say that ethics is gendered, what we mean is that the way we approach ethical thinking is different depending on a person's gender. So the way that a man might think about ethics or approach ethical topics or issues might be different than the way that a woman approaches ethical issues or topics, which also might be different from the way that somebody from a third sex approaches ethical issues or topics. And this is the main idea behind this article, or behind this week's chapter, and it's the idea that I really want to drive home. This idea is also a pretty radical idea. It's relatively new in the realm of moral philosophy. It popped up around the 1970s. Prior to that, and you kind of get this from reading about Kantian ethics and utilitarianism, the idea was that everybody had the same access and propensities to moral principles that everybody else did. That is, whether you were a utilitarian, that was the right thing to do regardless of your gender, and that everybody had the ability to kind of act according to utilitarianism or according to Kantian ethics. And more recently, however, Lawrence Kohlberg popularized the idea that there were differences in ethical thinking according to how psychologically developed we were. That is, according to how mature we were. At a young age, we weren't capable of acting according to ethical principles, and then as we get older and older, we are more and more able to act according to these abstract, rational principles. But the idea that they differed depending on gender was a lot more radical, and it came around because of Carol Gilligan. And Carol Gilligan argued in the 70s that this idea that men and women might differ psychologically, that is, they think differently. And as a result, they might think about ethics or approach ethics in a different way. And so there are really two claims here that Gilligan is making, and it's very important to distinguish these claims, not to run them together. So the first claim is that men and women think differently about ethics, that ethics is gendered, and that's a term I would really like for you to use. The second claim is how men and women are different in the way that they think about ethics, or the way that they think psychologically. And the second claim is that men are oriented towards abstract, impartial principles, and women are more oriented towards care or towards emotive principles. These are two very different claims. Notice that it's not enough to say that the differences between men and women don't reflect what Gilligan says. It could still be that ethics is gendered, that is, that men and women think differently about ethics, even if we reject that women are more emotional, because it could just be the case that there's some other difference we haven't discovered between men and women. So these are both very interesting discussion forum topics. I'd be very interested to see what you write about these. The first claim that men and women approach ethics differently, and the second about maybe what those differences are. If you have your own ideas about what the differences between men and women are, that might be worth writing about. If you have your own differences or your own ideas about whether men and women do differ psychologically, that would also be worth writing about. It is also important for me to note that Gilligan does provide, in her book, not in this chapter, she does provide some studies that are meant to support this claim that women are more emotional and more care-based, whereas men are more oriented toward abstract principles. However, we don't really get a sense of this in the chapter, so it really is important for you to draw upon your own experiences and people you know in the discussion forum to contest these claims. Do you feel like you are more abstract-based if you are a woman? Do you feel like you are more abstract-based if you are a man? If you're part of the third sex, do you feel like you outlie these two positions, or do you feel like you act more according to one than the other? Those would all be very interesting topics for discussion. And lastly, one last point I do want to make is that a lot of the topics we've covered in this class are pretty gender neutral. So we looked at capital punishment and we looked at our treatment of animals. And these are pretty gender neutral. That is that our gender doesn't play a huge role in how we approach or when we're exposed to these topics. It seems like we all kind of, most of us anyway, eat meat whether and that doesn't really have anything to do with our gender. And whether we receive a capital punishment or know somebody who's been affected by capital punishment. Our gender doesn't play a very large role in that either. However, I do want to point out that there are ethical issues where gender plays a very large role. So two ethical issues that come to mind are procreation and abortion. So these are two very important ethical issues, and gender plays a pivotal role. And what I mean by that is that whether we're a man or a woman or third sex is going to largely affect the outcomes or rights that we have in those cases, or vice versa. We might not have certain rights in those cases because of our gender, or we might have rights based on our gender. So this would again be another interesting topic for the discussion forum. Feel free to discuss or write about topics of procreation or abortion. I would like if we remain respectful and we keep the discussion ethical rather than political or religious, since this is a class on ethics, not a class on religion or politics. I look very forward to reading your discussion forum posts, and I will see you next week.